you know, I'm kind of cheaper with my brushes that way. I also don't like taking very good care of my brushes or having to what's the word, condition the bristles and stuff like that. Plus I love animals and I don't think it's necessary to take their fur, but that's a story for a different day. Their fur, sorry. I don't think it's necessary to take their fur. uh yeah, I don't know, they work for me. When it comes to watercolor supplies, the brushes are the lowest thing on my list. It's first watercolor paper. It is very important that you're using quality watercolor paper, 100% cotton, and I don't use anything that is thinner than 140 pounds or 300 GSM, which is the mid-weight kind of watercolor paper. But paper is expensive, and I do make sure that I invest in quality watercolor paper. Then it's paint for me, because as long as you know what to look for in paint, you can create great results with student grade paint. Of course, it has to be quality student grade paint, because there is student grade paint and there is student grade paint, if you know what I mean. I don't mean like the chalky student grade paint that, elementary schools use for their art projects. That's not what I mean. But there are quality, like, for example, Cotman from Watercolor is a student grade watercolor, and it's pretty good. Or even the Koi set from, I think it's Sakura, that's pretty good. Like, I started with those paints and they're fine. And also, for example, Van Gogh is another great student grade paint that offers decent quality for great price. So if you're in a budget, that's, just wanted to share that. Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about the supplies that I would recommend having on hand for this one. Um, I'll pop the beautiful photograph that we're going to be using as reference today in just a bit on the screen. But this is a little study that I worked on last night in preparation for today's lesson. And I usually, when I'm going to be filming tutorials or teaching classes, I just like going through my process once so that I know how to explain the steps better and not just like do it on the fly and confuse people. But so as you can see, and usually my webcam image is not as good as my actual DSLR, which I use for my edited videos. But you can see how the skin color was well achieved. And this is going to be a great lesson where we talk about mixing skin colors with it's not my method, but it's the primary color method, essentially, where you're bringing in a blue, a red, and a yellow to create your skin tones. So I'll be talking about that. Anyway, so yeah, watercolor paper, 140 pounds. This is from a brand called Baohong, and I get this via Amazon. Um, and what else? I have these 5 brushes with me. I don't know if I'm going to be using them all, but I think this is more than enough. This is my size 6 mop brush. This is a size 14 round. And then I have these 3 rounds in sizes 8. This is, I think, a 3, and this is a 0. Yeah, this is a 0. Okay, so this is the smallest brush that I'm going to be using, the size 0, mostly for pupils, eyelashes, fine creases around the eyes, and that kind of thing. We're going to be making our way from the largest brush toward the smallest brush, because we go from larger washes to painting medium-sized shapes to finally painting the last details. You don't want to be adding the eyelashes when you're midway through. You want to add the eyelashes until the very end. Okay? What else? I created my pencil sketch, which I'm going to be going through some tips on your pencil sketch so that you can make sure that you're setting yourself up for success in just a bit before getting started with the painting. But just as an FYI, I traced over the photo for this one because I want us to focus on the painting today, because there's already a lot going on in the painting. And I just traced over the photo, and then I transferred it. I use tracing paper, by the way, most of the time. And I do have a video on my channel and also on Patreon where I explain my entire process step by step, how I do my transferring using tracing paper, in case you'd like to check that out. But I make sure to use an HB pencil on my watercolor paper so that I can keep my drawing clean and light. and so that my pencil doesn't show too much through my paint at the end. I also used these two erasers. This is a soft graphite eraser. The brand is Generals. I get them via Amazon. Generals is my favorite brand when it comes to erasers. And I also have this kneadable eraser, which is covered in cat hair, which I use to sometimes lighten my sketch before getting started with the painting process. Some people create like a burrito or a cylindrical form and then go over their sketch like this, but you can just like tap it over dark areas to lighten it and clean it up, just to make sure that you don't have too much graphite floating on the surface of the paper, which can muddy up and like dull your colors. What else? Okay, in terms of my colors that I'm going to be using today, this is my professional set, because I do have a more student grade set, which I sometimes use for beginner tutorials and even more advanced tutorials from time to time. This paint set has a combination of paint from Winsor & Newton's professional line and Daniel Smith. It's a combo. Why is it a combo? It started as a Daniel Smith palette, and then I just started running out of colors. And here where I live in Mexico, it's just easier for me to find paint from Winsor & Newton's professional line. That's it. Like, that's the reason. And then when it comes to what colors I'm going to be using specifically, and what's most important here are the colors that I'm going to be using for the skin. We'll talk about the iris, which is the colored part of the eye, in just a bit. I will be bringing in a green, a yellow, and a blue for that. But when it comes to the skin, as I said, we're going to be using the primary color method, where you bring in the three primaries to create your skin tones and the kind of shadows, your range of values that you need for a sense of dimension around the eye, using those three primaries. And the three primaries that I'm going to be using are quinacridone rose for my red, which this is a cool red. I'm going to be using New Gamboge for my yellow, and this is a warm yellow. And I'm going to be using ultramarine blue for my blue, which is a warm blue. If you want guidance on color temperature and how I set up my palette using the split primary method and all that, I have videos on my channel and over on Patreon. Because color temperature, I know, can be a tricky subject, but look through those videos. I explained everything in depth so that you can really gain and build up those foundations on color theory, which is so important. All right, so cool red, warm yellow, warm blue, okay? And you can see yesterday how I even explored this vast range of skin colors that I can create using these three paint colors. And I would recommend doing something like this as well, okay? Because this way you can familiarize yourself with the vast range of skin colors that you can create with your chosen primaries. And if they don't work for you for one reason or another, change one color for another color, okay? Because one thing that I will say is you want to make sure that you're using colors that are transparent or semi-transparent. I don't want to start getting into technicalities because this is more of a beginner lesson, but when it comes to watercolor, you have opaque, semi-opaque, semi-transparent, and transparent. And when it comes to painting skin, you want to stay away from the opaques because they tend to lead to more mud. It can take away the light from the skin. Okay, so if you want glowing, vibrant skin, try to stick to transparent or semi-transparent colors. And this information you'll find in the packaging of the color, whether it's if you're buying little tubes, you'll find it there, but also even in little the pans. If it's quality paint, it'll tell you what it is. Okay. All right, cool. So that's it. And then I will be bringing in, aside from those, the color for the eyes, which she has beautiful kind of, you'll see she has like a pop of yellow near the pupil, and then it starts getting more and more blue. And I will say that it's not necessary that your eye color, the colors of your iris, are exactly the same as the photo. But if you want to try, go for it. What's most important is that the outer circle of the iris is darker than the inner part, because that almost always happens unless you have very, very dark eyes, which some people do. Almost always the outer circle, the outer ring around the iris is going to be darker than the inner part. So as long as you have those things in mind, you'll end up with believable looking eyes. But if you're striving for likeness to the eyes in the photo, then I'll tell you what I try to do. For that, I'm going to be using lemon yellow, which is a cool yellow. I'm going to be bringing in undersea green, which is a warm, deep, dark, rich green from Daniel Smith. And I'm also going to be repeating the ultramarine blue around the iris to really provide a little bit more contrast around the iris. And I will be bringing in a little bit of Payne's gray for the eyelashes, for the pupil, which is black looking, and to darken any colors as I go if I need to grab my Payne's gray. Payne's gray is a cool blue biased gray. And depending on the brand, the Payne's gray might look a little bit more blue or a little bit more of closer to a neutral gray. This Payne's gray from Winsor & Newton is a little bit more blue, but it doesn't matter what gray you have, just have a gray on hand. Even if you have neutral tint or Jane's gray or anything like that, just grab yourself a gray, it'll be fine. Okay? And I think that's it. I have my container of water. I have taped my watercolor sheet down onto my black cutting mat. I get asked all the time whether I work on a tilted surface or not. And usually when I am filming tutorials, I have cat hairs on my face. When I am filming tutorials, or teaching classes like this, I'm working on a flat horizontal table. I'm not working on a tilted surface. And this is because of how my camera is set up so that you can see things more clearly and more of a close-up view. Okay, but when I am working for myself, I do try to work on more of a tilted surface, because using gravity to your advantage when working with watercolor is very, very helpful, especially when you're painting large scenes and very large washes, things like that. But now I'm pretty much just used to painting on a flat horizontal surface. Okay, let's see. What size paper is it best to use for this exercise? Let me tell you exactly the size that I'm going to be working in, Michelle, so that you can prepare something similar. So the height of this watercolor sheet that I have cut for this exercise is 3.2 inches in height. So you can prepare a sheet that is, let's say, 3.5 inches in height. And then in width, it's 8.5 inches. So let's just go with 3.5 height, 8.5 width. 3.5 by 8.5. Okay. Let's see what other questions I have. Is there something special about the size 0 brushes that have another number with it, like a 50? So those are even smaller than the size 0, Shannon. It's fine if you want to use them. Okay, they're perfect. It's great for lashes and things like that. It's like a part, a fraction of a 0, if that makes sense. I'm terrible with math. Why does your 8 and 3 brush round brushes have more puff at the top rather than the middle? 8 and 3. Let's see. 8 and 3 brushes have more of a puff at the top rather than the middle. It's the shape of the brush. As I said, these are from Winsor & Newton, so these are more European. I don't know if Royal and Langnickel, I think it's also European. I'm not sure. But the fact of the matter is that even within round brushes, even within filbert brushes, even within that, there is going to be a difference in size and shape depending on the brand. And it's important that you kind of experiment and explore whatever is within your budget and see what shape and size works best for you. I don't know. It's just something that changes from brand to brand. And also, once you wet it, the shape can also change. So there's that. Sometimes they become pointier when you wet them. See that? So now the point is a lot finer when you wet them, okay? But I don't know, it's just a variation within brands, if that makes sense. I have brushes that look that way, but I find them intimidating. I will invest in a monograph pencil eraser soon. Cool, awesome. All right, so let me remove myself from the stream and share the media, the photo that we're going to be using. Here's our reference photo. Let me make sure that everything is working properly. Okay, cool. So here's the reference photo that we're going to be using. As you can see, her eyes, especially the iris, which is the colored part of the eye, it's a beautiful color. There's more of a kind of a yellowish, yellow ochre near the pupil, and then it becomes kind of green, bluish, or a greenish blue color. And you might end up with something that looks more blue or more green, depending on the colors that you're using and how you do your layering. But again, what's most important is that the center of the iris around the pupil is lighter and the outer ring is darker. Okay, that's the most important thing for believable results. And whether your eye color looks the same as the photo or not, I want you to think of that as a secondary thing, because first and foremost, you're looking for believable results. And then second to that, you're trying to achieve likeness. The most important thing as a beginner is to achieve realism via structure, via understanding anatomy and all of this, texture techniques that I'm going to show you, stuff like that. And then after you're comfortable with that, after you have achieved those skills, then you can strive for likeness, okay? Is what I would always recommend. Okay, so I wanted to share just this part of the process with you. Let me see if you can see my outline sketch is very, very light, okay? But this is my HB pencil, and I just wanted to save a few things to share with you, because as I said, your outline sketch is the foundation for everything else. If your outline sketch is not looking okay when it comes to proportions, shapes, alignment of the eyes, and so on, no amount of paint and layering and detail is going to help you arrive at believable results. So spend time with your preliminary sketch, learn to enjoy the sketching process. This is not a drawing class, but I do have many drawing videos on my channel and over on Patreon in case you like to develop your drawing skills. But make sure, just a few key things to make sure that your sketch shows before moving forward, okay? Make sure that your eyebrows are not super long, okay? And this little girl does have like a lighter section in her eyebrows. The inner portion closer to the tear ducts is lighter and like more sparse. And then it becomes darker and thicker as the shape or hair kind of move away toward the edges of the face. Okay, so notice that. Usually the eyebrows start along the inner edge of the eye. So if I were to draw a line going up from the tear duct, the eyebrow usually starts somewhere around there. Make sure that your eyebrows are not starting super close together, okay? Because that'll look weird. And this little girl, as I said, these two sections are very light, so I'm going to have that in mind as I am painting. Okay, let me create a little bit of shadow here so that you can see my sketch a little bit better. Okay, aside from that, make sure that your pupils are sitting right in the center of the iris in both eyes. Make sure that they are the same size, okay? And make sure that the iris is also centered, not centered because okay, so they're not exactly centered within the sclera. The sclera is the white of the eye, but make sure that they are also the same size. Make sure that your irises are also the same size. And make sure that your pupils are pointing toward the same direction, because sometimes I often see with beginner portraits and eye studies is that the pupil and the iris are not looking toward the same direction, or they are very asymmetrical, okay? So notice those from the beginning, because you're going to be filling in the pupil and the iris shape very, very carefully, okay? Aside from that, notice, what I like noticing is the shape of the sclera to the right and to the left of the iris in both eyes, okay? Usually, part of the iris is going to be covered by the upper eyelid. And if it's a relaxed kind of set of eyes, sometimes even a little bit at the bottom by the bottom eyelid. In this specific case, we see that the top of the iris is being covered up by the upper eyelid. And then we see the bottom edge of the circle of the iris completely. It's not being covered up by the lower eyelid, okay? We see a teeny tiny kind of section of the sclera. So the sclera is the white of the eye here, right below the iris, before the waterline, okay? Make sure that your sketch shows these things. What is going on over here with the sclera? What is the shape of the sclera created over here? Does it compare with the reference photo? What is the shape of the sclera right here, the inner part of the sclera? Does it look like the shape of the sclera in the reference photo? Am I leaving a very, very narrow, teeny tiny part of the sclera down here before the waterline? Okay. This is important because if you don't pay attention to these things, you might end up with a set of eyes that looks very surprised, very open, or very wide. This is all about getting proportions right, okay? Notice these things. And then I also created a little line for the tear duct, which is this inner part of the eye, okay? So I've already gone over some of those anatomical tidbits that are important that you bring into your eyes if you want to make them look realistic. Let me go over them again because they are 8 in total, okay? The pupil, the iris, the sclera, highlights is something that I need to add to my sketch. I have them, but maybe I should draw them a little bit better. Highlights are very important, okay? Now, I'm not trying to copy the highlight shape exactly as it is in the photo. What's important is that I bring it in and that it looks the same in the left and right eye, okay? So I just created a little highlight shape here along the top in both eyes, similar to what I'm observing in the photo, but I'm not really trying to copy it exactly as is. Just make sure that you're bringing in a couple of highlights in both eyes, okay? So again, pupil, iris, highlights, sclera, okay? Then we have the creases. We need those creases, especially above the eyes. We need to create some creases, okay? What is a crease? The crease is the line that is created when the eyelid folds over itself. When the eye is open, the eyelid folds over itself and you see a couple of lines above her eyes. Do you see that? And depending on the eye shape, you may not see very much of the crease line at all, but it is still there. And I would recommend looking for them, okay? Because if you see crease lines, you want to make sure that you're bringing them into your painting, okay? Do you see those lines? Okay, aside from that, you have your tear ducts, which are those pink fleshy bits in the inner corners of the eyes. You have your eyebrows and you have your lashes, okay? I think that's it. Pupil, iris, sclera, tear duct, waterline. Ooh, I forgot the water lines. Water lines are very, very important as well. If you don't bring in water lines, you can make your painting look flat because the water line in this photo, we see a little bit of the bottom water lines in both eyes. Do you see that? Do you notice that? Especially along the edges. If she were looking up or we were lower than her eye or head level, we would even see the upper water line and not the bottom water line. It depends on what direction she's looking toward. the tilt of her head, and also our vantage point in relation to her face and head. Okay. But you're always going to see at least some portion of the upper or lower water lines. And it's very important that you add those in because they provide a sense of thickness to the eyelids. And if you don't add them in, it can flatten out the eye. So again, observe these 8 things in your reference photos. And if it's your goal to later on paint from imagination, then at least you know what to bring in when you're drawing or painting from imagination, right? So one last time, pupil is the black looking circle in the center of the eye, and it's a hole that opens and closes depending on the light situation in the environment you're in. If there is very little light, it's going to open. And if there is a lot of light, it's going to close, okay? Of course, it's covered by the cornea. The cornea is this transparent layer over the iris and the pupil, so you don't actually have like a hole there that things can fall into. But essentially, that's what it is. It's like an opening, okay? The iris is the colored part of the eye. The sclera is the white of the eye. And the sclera, don't leave the sclera completely white because it's going to look cartoony if you leave it white, okay? You need to bring in, sometimes you have like a color change within the sclera where you see a little bit of pink or brown. But at the very least, you need to bring in the shadows created by the upper eyelid. And also because the eyeball is like a spherical structure, oftentimes you can see some shadows as the sphere recedes into the eye socket on the edges. Along the edges, you can see a little bit of gray. That's shadow, okay? Never leave the sclera white. It's like leaving teeth white. You're going to end up with cartoony results. Tear duct, okay? Where tears are formed, where they come out, okay? Eyelashes, eyebrows, I'm going to teach you my techniques for that. Crease line and water lines, okay? So those are the 8 things to always pay attention to and look for in reference photos. Great. All right, so I think that is it. Let me see if I have any questions. And make sure that you refine your sketch. If you forgot to add anything, go ahead and add it in with an HB pencil or something else that you enjoy. I would recommend adding in some shapes where you see some shadows under the eye because we will be needing those for shading. So we want to create a sense of structure around the eye. So we want to think of how the brow bone is coming out, creating a little bit of a bump or volume, which creates a shadow in certain parts of above the eye and such. But notice those shadow shapes below the eye. Notice the shadow shape over here on the left side of her head, on the temple area over here. Notice that. There is some hair right here that we can see, which I can also add in that shape in my sketch. There is a little bit of hair over here as well that we can see behind her head shape. And just make sure that everything is looking okay before jumping in. This eyebrow over here also has a little section where hair is very light or sparse. So I also added in a little section right there. Okay, just to remind myself not to paint that in so much. Any shadow shapes that you want to add in, just go ahead and sketch them in lightly. And we're about to get started with the painting. And over here, so remember that another thing that I want to add to my sketch are the eyelashes. So remember that the spherical structure of the eyeball is pushing out the skin and it creates shadows under the eye, okay? Let me see if I can keep this light from creating such a big glare, okay? Now for the eyelashes, I'll teach you my techniques or what I do to paint the eyelashes, but even before starting, it is important that you notice how they curve how the curve changes, whether it's in the outer part of the eye or the inner part of the eye, the curve changes direction, okay? And the eyelashes start along the upper and lower water lines, okay? Eyelashes in the outer edge are a little bit longer, and then they become shorter and shorter as they make their way in, and the direction of the curve also changes. You can add some little lashes at the bottom, make sure that the curve also changes along that lash line. And I'm right-handed, so drawing and painting the eyelashes on the left eye is always a struggle for me. But same thing, the lashes that are kind of in the middle of the eyelid are almost going straight up because of perspective. And they become more and more curved toward the left and toward the right as they make their way across the lash line, okay? And paying attention to these things will help you paint them more successfully later. Cluster them together in different ways and don't go overboard with the amount, because that can lead to more cartoony kind of fake eyelash effect at the end. All right, so with that, I'm all done with my outline sketch. That's what it looks like. And we're gonna get started with the painting process. See if I have any questions. I would think it's totally different brush. Thank you for explaining. I'll try not to be as scared of them then. Yeah, no reason to be scared of those brushes. Brushes are your friends. Here to help you create art. All right, all done. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna try to close the curtains to see if there is not as much glare if I close them. I think that helped a bit. Let's see. Okay, great. Let's start. Okay, so I have kind of a mess here in my both mixing areas, but this is just what I was using yesterday as I was creating my prep painting. So I know that the colors that I have on here are just the 3 ones that I'm going to be using for the skin. Okay, so I'm not going to be worrying about cleaning those sections out. If you do have other colors on your mixing palette, then make sure to clean it up before getting started. Okay, so this is New Gamboge right here, and essentially what I'm going to try to create is a color similar to what I'm observing in the photo. Okay, what do I see in the photo? I see kind of a medium skin tone when it comes to value, like lightness to darkness. I would say that this is like a medium-ish color, okay? And then when it comes to temperature, I would say it's warmer skin. I see more of a more towards the yellow than towards the pink, okay? So I have those things in mind as I'm creating my skin color with my 3 primary colors. My New Gamboge, my quinacridone rose, and my ultramarine blue. And it is very helpful to have scrap pieces of watercolor paper on hand, especially when it comes to painting skin, so that you can test these mixtures out to see if they're what you need. I will say, again, it's more important that you arrive at believable results than arriving at a skin color that is exactly the same as the one in the photo. If your skin color is a little bit pinkish or even a little bit more yellow than what you see in the photo, what's most important is value. Value is more important than color correctness. And what I mean with value is achieving darker areas where you want them, achieving lighter areas where you want them, and so on. Okay. Plus, there is always the possibility of creating a glaze at the end of the process where you're creating a quick kind of very, very watered down glaze over your work to slightly change the temperature. Okay. So to me, this is a little bit too dark. I'm going to add more yellow into it. Get it a little bit lighter, a little bit more similar to what I'm observing. I think something like this would be great. And I'm trying to achieve like a tea or coffee consistency on my palette. I like that. Okay. I like this color a lot for her to start with. Okay. All right. So I'm going to begin, and I need to change to my mop brush so that I can paint faster. And the objective with this initial layer is to simply start developing our range of values. This is just the first layer, and we're going to be working in at least 3 to 4 layers, okay? You don't have to get everything right away. I'm going to share my technique that I use to keep things wetter for a little bit longer so that you can provide some structure to the head and start developing that range of values even in this first layer, okay? Larger size 6 mop brush, tea consistency color, kind of similar, but maybe not the same as what I'm observing. That's okay, because we're going to be changing the ratios of the colors in the mixture as we go. Taking some of this very watered down color, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in everything quickly except for the eyeballs. I'm going over the waterline. You can even go over the tear duct if you want, but avoid the eyeballs, okay? And I'm going to make my way, I'm right-handed, so it's easier for me to make my way toward the right, but I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to dip my brush in my container, remove that excess water, go over this entire layer again, starting over here in the left edge and making my way toward the right edge. Why? Because I want to water things down, make sure I'm starting nice and light, and I want to keep things wet for longer so that I can start sculpting the face, okay? If you just go over things once, dipping my brush in my container again, and just going in with water in my brush, if you just make your way from left to right once, by the time you make your way to this edge over here, this edge is already going to be dry. And then you try to, start developing your values, and it's going to be a mess because your painting is already going to be partially dry. You don't want that, okay? So make sure you're going over the entire thing multiple times. How many times totally depends on your working environment, the paper that you're working on, and so on. But right now where I live, it's very warm, it's dry, okay? So I'm going to make sure to take my time with this and go over everything 4 or 5 times, okay? Make my way carefully around the eyes, going over the creases, going over the water lines. Everything is still wet and workable because I'm using a large brush, because I went in with water 2, 3 times. Not a lot of water. Every single time I go into my container, I gently scrape my bristles of my brush along the top of my container to remove that excess drippage. Because if you go in with a lot of water in your brush and there's not as much water on your painting, or it's already starting to dry, you're going to create a back run, okay? Back runs and blooms happen when you go in with more water on your brush and your bristles than what you have on your paper. Okay. I'm gonna get rid of this kind of outline effect that I created here by just gently going over this section with just the bristles of my brush. There we go. All right, great. So I see this even sheen all throughout this area, and I'm going to start developing my values. So very quickly, I add in more of my Quin Rose, more New Gamboge, and more ultramarine blue. Make sure you're using those three colors and that you're not bringing in another color because it's very easy to do, okay? And I'm going to go in with a darker version, okay? So the more blue you have in your mixture, the darker it's going to look, okay? And the thicker the mix, also, the thicker it's going to be, okay? So using this color, I'm going to start developing darker areas, and I'm just going to allow my colors to start merging together. I'm going to clean them up in just a bit, okay? And I'm just dropping this color into sections that I see are darker in the reference that I want to start darkening. And here, for example, under the eye, remember how the spherical structure of the eyeball creates a shadow below it because it pushes out the skin. The brow bone, think of the three-dimensional structure of what it is that you're shading, right? Or sculpting. Where would you have shadows? Where are certain parts kind of blocking or impeding light from reaching other sections? Where do you see darker areas? You can see how everything is very, very soft. Certain sections are not looking very, maybe expanded a little bit too much. So if you want to clean sections up, all you have to do is rinse out your brush, remove that excess water by blotting the tip of your brush on your absorbent towel, and just gently, very, very gently smooth out those areas. You can do a little bit of lifting even, using the clean and slightly damp bristles of your brush to gently remove some paint. And as long as your paper is still wet and workable, you can do these things. You can gently fix little textures. You can lift. You can start doing those things. All right. So my paper is still wet and workable because I took my time with that first layer. And what I'm going to do is pop in a little bit more of a pinkish skin color. So how can I manipulate this color so that it looks a little bit more pinkish? All I have to do is add in a little bit more of my Quin Rose. And I'm just going to drop in a little bit of pink in the cheeks down here for a little bit of color variation in that skin. There's a lot of variation in our skin, okay? Some sections of our faces are a little bit cooler. Some sections are a little bit warmer. Adding a little bit of New Gamboge, adding a tiny bit of ultramarine blue. A little bit more Quin Rose. And I still have a chance to continue sculpting because everything is still wet and workable. I see a sheen all throughout my wetted section, which I do have a hair dryer in front of me because it is important that we work in layers and that we allow everything to dry as we move forward. But I'm going to switch to my size 14 round brush because I want a little bit more control. And as your paper starts becoming no longer as wet, but more like going toward the damp stage, the paint that you apply is going to look darker because there's no longer as much there's no longer as much water diluting that paint, okay? So I'm going to go in with a bit of a darker mix and I'm going to continue darkening certain sections. And do know that if your paper is already starting to dry, it's best to allow things to dry completely and then continue creating shadow shapes in another layer. Okay, you don't have to do everything right now. I can continue because most of my paper is still wet and workable. So I'm going to go in and just darken certain sections a little bit more before calling this layer done. allowing watercolor to do its thing. And here I can push that a little bit more. Okay. All right. It is time to allow this to dry. And then we can work on another layer for our shadows later. Do some final lifting and cleaning up. Maybe lift up a little bit from this section of her eyebrow. All right. Great. Gonna leave that alone. As watercolor dries, it's gonna look lighter than how it looks when it's wet. So do have that in mind as well. Okay, so there's not really much I can do right now. Everything has to dry. If I work on the eyes right now, I can risk the skin color kind of bleeding into the eyeball. So I don't want that. I am going to dry this with my hair dryer, which I have in front of me. I don't want to mute the microphone because one time when I was doing a live stream, for some reason, the sound just, when I unmuted my mic, you couldn't hear me. So I don't know what I did to my live streaming software when I kind of muted and unmuted, but it messed up my audio. So I'm not going to unmute my microphone today. So if you don't want to hear my hair dryer, please turn down the volume right now. And I shouldn't be long, okay? Have a sip of coffee first and see if I have any questions before doing that. Is everything you've done so far considered one layer? Yes, one layer. Yeah. I would say the way that I see it, everything I do before allowing the layer to dry completely is one layer. And then everything I do next, before allowing everything to dry completely again, I refer to as another layer. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna go dry this and I'll be right back. Sorry for the noise. Turn down the volume. All right, all done. Layer number 1 is finished. This is what it's looking like. So as you can see, with this initial layer, I was able to develop a nice range of values. I'm still missing a lot of detail and contrast, but you can certainly see lighter areas in the skin and the darker areas that I'm starting to develop. And if you're wondering why I painted the eyebrows right now, like in that first layer, why I started with the eyebrows, well, that's because the eyebrows in and of themselves are darker, and it's, for me, having an initial kind of soft layer in the wherever I'm going to be developing a texture like hair, it just leads to more natural results because you're starting with a soft kind of similar value to the hair that you're going to be painting in that area. So that's why. Okay. I'm going to start doing a little bit of work in the iris and the pupil, and then we can move on back to the skin and start with our second layer there. So what I'm going to be doing for her irises is I'm going to be using my lemon yellow, which is my cool yellow that I have in this set. And I'm going to be using this green from Daniel Smith, which is called Undersea Green. However, a little tip for you, and this is also something that I do with animal eyes, whenever the eye color lends itself, of course, because it doesn't always happen. But whenever I can, I like starting with a bright yellow. Even you could even start with a little under layer of bright yellow and then build the other colors over that under layer. Like in this case, it would be like a bluish green color. And you would paint that over the yellow after it has dried. And that creates a beautiful glowing result in the eyes. So that's what I'm gonna be doing right now, is painting that initial layer in the iris. So let me show you what these colors look like, because I haven't shown you what the lemon yellow and the undersea green look like. So lemon yellow is a cool yellow, very different from the new gamboge that we were using for the skin, okay? New gamboge is a warm yellow. This is a cool yellow. Warmer yellows lean more toward the orange. Cooler yellows lean more toward the green. And there is an in between as well, like, you know, where a yellow is not necessarily super cool or super warm. But whatever the case, I'm going to be adding, as I create a slightly lighter green, is I'm going to be adding a little bit of undersea green, which this is what undersea green looks like from Daniel Smith. It's a beautiful, deep, warm, kind of mossy green that granulates. And what I'm going to create is a very, very light kind of green by mixing these two together. Okay, if I mix these two together, and by the way, you could use a sap green, you could use a hooker's green, anything like this where you have like a warmer green. And with warmer green, I mean it has some yellow in it already. Okay, warmer greens are leaning more toward the yellow, cooler greens lean more toward the blue. Okay, so emerald green or viridian green, for example, are very cool greens. Okay, so whatever warm green you have, use that. And then whatever cool yellow you have, use that. And I'm gonna start with the cool yellow on its own in the entire iris. Okay, I'm gonna even cover up the pupil, because the pupil, since the pupil is black, I can add the pupil later after my iris has dried with no issue, because black is it's the darkest color. It's the colors underneath are not gonna impact the black. Okay, but I'm going to start with this yellow, and then I'm going to add a little bit of green as I make my way out. And then I'm going to allow this layer to dry, and we can make it look more like a blue-green in a second layer when we're darkening the outer edges of the iris. That's kind of what I'm going to do right now, okay? All right. So I'm going to create just a little puddle of plain lemon yellow. Let me clean out this section of my palette. I don't want these colors, which I don't even know what these colors are over here. Clean this out. I don't want this to affect my yellow. Let me know if you have any questions or if I'm going too fast. I'd be happy to help you out. My webcam really struggles with the yellows, by the way. For example, in front of me, I see a very bright yellow, but through the camera, it looks lighter and even like a little bit more green than what it actually looks like. But anyway, and then I'm going to add a little bit of undersea green right here. I don't want to go too dark. As I said, I want to keep this first layer in the iris very, very bright. This is just the first layer that we're going to be building on, okay? It's kind of I would say this is like a tea consistency that I'm going to go in with initially. Okay, this is my size 3 round brush, or it's a 4 actually. This is a size 4. But you could go in with a 3, a 4. I actually have a 3 that I think would work better. Where do I have that 3? I don't find it. I'll use this one. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go in with a a little bit of my plain lemon yellow, and I'm going to go over the entire thing except for the highlights. I'm going to leave the highlights just free of paint, okay? Leave them bright. In order for them to be the brightest highlights, you want to leave the paper shining through, right? So work around the highlights, cover up the pupil, and paint this initial layer in the entire iris. And go over the entire shape 2-3 times. And then what I'm going to do is take my lighter green that I created by just bringing a little bit of undersea green and start creating a little tiny bit of color variation, especially around the iris. Just very gently popping in a little bit of green. I don't want my green to overpower the yellow, because if the green starts expanding too much and covering up the yellow, you're going to get rid of that glowing underlayer, right? So just pop in a little bit of green to create a little bit of color variation. That's it. That's all I'm going to do in that eye. Let me know if you hear the ice cream truck going by. Okay. So going over everything, including the pupil, except for the highlights. Go over the iris a couple of times so that it stays wet for a little bit longer. And go in with a light green. And just pop in a little bit of this light green, especially along the outer edges, here and there, for a little bit of color variation. I'm gonna go in with a smaller brush. This is my size 0, and I'm just going to fix my edges a tiny bit. Remember to continue comparing your right iris and pupil with your left iris and pupil, okay? Because as you're painting, you can start kind of changing the shape that you've created, and you want to be very careful with that. And it's easier to move your paint while it's still wet if you need to clean up the circle, clean up edges, anything like that. This one is already dry. Let's see. Okay, I think they're looking good. I think they're relatively symmetrical in size. Okay, great. I'm gonna leave them as that at that. And let's allow that to dry. And in the meantime, we can continue working on the skin. Actually, let's go ahead and paint the tear ducts. Why not? So for the tear duct, we go back to our skin color mixture, but again, the mix is going to have more of that Quin Rose in it, or whatever cool red it is that you're using. So going back to this mix, I think I need a little bit more Quin Rose. You can test it out to see if it's pink. More pink. I don't want my tear ducts to look super red, but I just want them to look pink. I think that's okay. No. More red. There it is. That's a good one. And the more watered down, the lighter it's gonna be, okay? That's a good color. I'm gonna switch to my size 0 brush. Take a little bit of this pink mix. I'm gonna observe that reference photo closely, notice what these look like. These eyes that we're observing, it's not a perfectly symmetrical forward-facing head. So we do see a little bit more of this tear duct on the left than we do the right. Okay. So that's the kind of thing where sometimes if you stop observing the reference, you're going to go by what your brain is telling you to do and not what things actually look like. And then sometimes you end up with things that don't look very realistic. Because what happens is that our brains are almost always going to go back to doing the things the way um, what is easiest for it to do. And what is easiest for our brain to do? Keep things symmetrical, keep things aligned, keep things straight, that kind of thing. It's always going to try to straighten things out for you, to create a pattern, to create very obvious looking outlines, to separate things out clearly, um, that kind of thing. And so by observing references, whether it's a photo or something that you have in front of you in real life, you can avoid reverting back to doing things in the automatic way that your brain is going to tell you to do things, if that makes sense. You are reminded of the asymmetries, of the imperfections, of those little nuances that are going to help you make things more natural and realistic. Okay. So even within the tear duct, I try to create at least a couple of pink values. And tear ducts are very moist. So you're often going to find those little teeny tiny reflections in the tear ducts. So if you would like to leave some little sections just unpainted in those tear ducts to create little highlight shapes there, that's also a good idea. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but as I was painting my initial wash for the skin, I was painting very quickly because I didn't want things to just start drying on me. So there are some little sections around the eye where my edges are looking a little bit raggedy, a little bit, um, yeah, just not super clean, not super smooth. So what I'm doing right here is I'm just going in with my size 4 round brush. It's clean, just damp bristles, and just doing a very gentle scrubbing motion along the edge that I want to soften, and that should help soften the edge. Okay, if anything like that happened to you, you can do that right now because the skin is already dry. And sometimes, most of the time, I do like waiting until everything is dry to do some gentle scrubbing and this kind of correcting, because when everything is wet or even damp, I cannot tell you how many times I make the mistake even worse if I try to go in and fix something when the paint is wet or already starting to dry. Okay? So try to try to be patient, notice those little things that you need to fix, but then allow things to dry and be patient and know that you can do it later. Most of the time you will be able to reactivate that color, and at least soften the little mistake, okay, or imperfection. Okay, awesome. So now that we have done some work in the eyeballs, let's go ahead and start with our shadow shapes. And this is when things can start getting a little bit scary, but try not to be scared, okay? We're gonna be working wet on dry now. So what I mean by this is we're gonna paint in our shape on dry paper, and then we're going to remove that paint from our bristles and soften the edge, okay? And all of the work that I'm going to be doing now, I would see as one layer. It's very important that you pay attention to what areas you just worked in, so that you can kind of jump around and whenever you need to, and allow that section to dry. Because if you continue working in one same area, it's more likely that you're going to arrive at overworked results. And it's very important that you learn to jump around when you're working with watercolor, because this way you can allow a section to dry, work on something else in the meantime, and then if you need to come back to that area to darken or whatever you need to do, you can do that after that area has dried. Okay? So you're going to see me work on many sections at a time. But what's most important here is that you acknowledge these shapes that you're painting in as abstract, irregular shadow shapes. Okay. And then you can go in and soften any edges with a clean and slightly damp brush if you need to. And another thing is try not to cover up lighter sections. Okay, so you can see it in her face, what we're able to see of her face, the lighter sections that I've already tried to develop. Okay, for example, here in this T zone, right? Here I see a lighter section that maybe I have to lift up a little bit later. Here you see a lighter section, but what I'm getting at is you don't want to cover those lightest sections of the skin up, okay? You're just trying to darken and do more layering in shadow areas, okay? All right, so I have two brushes on hand. I have my size 14 and I have my size 8. And I'm going to switch between them depending on how large the shadow shape is. If I need to paint a larger shadow shape, I'm going to go in with this size 14 round. And if it's a smaller shadow shape or that initial layer that I'm going to be creating in the eyebrows, I'm going to be doing with this one here. I'm going to start with my larger brush. And I'm going to start by creating a color that I can use for my shadow areas, very similar to the last color that I was using in that initial layer. More of this chocolatey kind of brownish color is what I want to create right now. Okay, I'm starting with my new gamboge and my Quin Rose. I'm grabbing a scrap piece of watercolor paper so that I can test this out. I'm going to add my ultramarine blue. Remember that the more ultramarine blue you add in, the darker the skin color is going to become. That's a beautiful color. I think I need to go a little bit darker, just a little bit. And at this point, you can go in with more of a coffee consistency. You no longer have to go in as light as you were going in before. That's a nice color right there. Okay, so I'm going to start and my color is going to run out. I'm just going to make more of this, a similar color to this as I go, okay? I'm going to take this, let me grab my larger photo, and let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to start with the shadow shape over here. And make sure that you're keeping these abstract, okay? And with that, I mean certain sections are thicker, other sections are thinner, right? Sometimes I like pressing down the belly of my brush a little bit more to create larger shapes. Other times I'm lifting my brush and using more of the tip of the brush. It creates this irregular shape. Softening the edges of these shapes. Okay, I'm gonna take some more paint, more New Gamboge, more Quin Rose, more ultramarine blue. Trying to get a similar color to what I was just using. I'm gonna start with this shadow shape right here. This is the crease. And I see a shadow shape here, going down kind of like that. And right here, another shape. Rinse out my brush, remove that excess water by blotting the tip of my brush on my absorbent towel, and softening any edges that need to be softened. And bringing this up. There we go. I think I need a little bit of a darker shape here. More Quin Rose, more New Gamboge, more ultramarine blue. Create a similar color. It's a little bit too purple. Need more New Gamboge. And I need a shadow shape here. And here. Rinse out my brush, remove that excess water, and soften the edge. Remember to leave things alone. Don't overwork areas. Don't stay stuck in one single area too long, because I assure you that's going to lead to overworked results. Taking more paint, and then here I see another shadow shape. And we're slowly but surely starting to sculpt these sections of the head around the eye. Let's see if I have any questions. Okay, I'm gonna create more. I'm gonna go into the brows. More Quin Rose, more New Gamboge, and ultramarine blue. Let's see if this is a good color. Yep. I'm going to switch to my size 8 brush. And I'm going to start with the brows. This is an initial kind of abstract shape that I like starting with. I'm not going in with texture techniques just yet, but I am kind of starting to incorporate a bit of just some brush strokes here and there to just ever so slightly start describing hair texture along the edges mostly. But it's basically just an abstract shape. And you can see how I've avoided painting in any color here because the eyebrow is pretty sparse in this area, okay? Okay, I'm gonna do the same for the other brow. Let me know if you have any questions. More ultramarine blue. Looks very similar. Taking some of this paint, and I'm gonna paint in an abstract irregular shape. Where do I see that eyebrow shape breaking? It's somewhere around here. Painting in that shape. Not getting too concerned with textures just yet. We will be going in with a layer where we're focusing more on texture strokes a little bit later. I think the brow is a little bit too long, so I'm going to take my absorbent towel, just lift up a little bit of this paint while it's still wet. And just ever so slightly pulling a little bit of this wet paint in. That's it. That's all I'm going to do for this layer in the brows. I'm going to continue working on shadow shapes in the face. Gonna make my darker hair shape right here. This section is already dry, by the way. So I can continue working in that area if I want. I have a face now. Awesome. Let's continue working patiently in layers. Okay, so here I see some hair coming out from around here and creating a little bit of a shape over the ear. This shape over here is the ear. Just going to create a little sense of hair texture, irregular hair texture right there. Adding more blue into the mix to darken it up. I'm going to darken this section here while the paint is still wet. And on the opposite side, this section of the hair is actually on our side in front of the ear, but this section over here that we see is behind her head. Okay, so I want to be careful to kind of transmit that, and maybe I'm going to add more hair, but I want to make sure that the edge of the head is in front of the hair, if that makes sense. Over here, the hair is in front of the head, okay, because it's on our side. But this side over here, the hair is behind the head. Add more ultramarine blue. And I'm bringing in my artistic license quite a bit to darken this hair behind the head a little bit more, because in the photo, looks like her hair is tied up in some kind of updo, so there's less hair in this section when compared to this other section, or at least from this perspective. Okay, I'm gonna leave that alone. Let me pull a little bit of this wet paint. Okay. I'm gonna create more of my darker color mixture that I was using for my shadow shapes, and I'm gonna start creating the crease shapes above the eyes. I need my New Gamboge, Quin Rose. Definitely should start using this area of my palette right here. Quin Rose, New Gamboge, and ultramarine blue. Trying to get my shadow color similar to what I was using before with the more chocolatey color. Yeah, that'll work. I'm gonna switch on over to my size 4 round brush. You might want to use a size 3 or even a size 2. But I'm gonna go in and start darkening the creases. And you can see it in this little girl. You see part of the crease on the on this left part, or left kind of half of the eye, and then you don't see it, and then you see it again over here in this inner corner. Okay. And when it comes to creases, I always have this like inner debate with myself with explaining things as a line. They're not actually lines. They are shadow shapes created by the folding eyelid, right? I always hesitate about using the term line because, especially if you're just getting started, again, with what your brain is doing, right? Your brain is going to tell you to create lines around everything so that you can more easily understand those things. But these aren't lines, and there are no lines in realism. Not even the eyelashes are a line, at least not a line with one consistent thickness, because even in eyelashes, even though we draw them as a single stroke, the base of the eyelash is thicker than the tip of the eyelash. Okay, so there is a line weight variation in that line. Okay, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to start seeing things more as shapes than as lines. And the same thing is happening over here on this side. Let me open up my larger reference. Okay, where you see this inner part of the crease and it connects with the shadow shape down here that I have to continue working on later. And then you skip over that middle section and then you see it again over here on the right half. Notice that? I'm going to paint in the water lines, okay, which you can see in her are, I would say, even a little bit darker than the skin underneath. Sometimes it's lighter than the skin underneath, sometimes it's darker, it depends on the person. But I'm going to continue using, maybe it's best to use like a smaller brush for this. Make sure whatever size of brush you use, it has a nice fine tip when it's wet. Take some of the same color that you were just using, and I'm just going to go in and paint the water line. I can still see my shape here. I'm observing the reference photo. Notice how the water line in some sections gets a little bit thinner and then it becomes a little bit thicker over here in the outer edge of the eye. See that? Again, you don't want to keep like you don't want to make this a line. Make it more of a shape with larger areas and smaller areas. Okay. I'm going to do the same for this left eye. And then I get a little bit thinner and thinner as I make my way in and toward the tear duct. Notice, continue observing the shape of the sclera, okay? And make sure that you're not distorting things or changing shapes as you continue painting, because that's very easy to do if we stop observing the reference. There we go. Okay. All right. So I think it's best that I allow the skin to dry completely. This part of the hair is a little bit wet still. So let's continue our work in the iris and then we can paint the pupil after we're done. By this point, the irises are completely dry. And we also need to work on the shadows in the eyeballs as well. So let's do that now. Thanks so much. All right, let me have a sip of coffee. My throat is getting a little bit parched. All right, let's continue working on the irises. And as I said, I want to make them look a little bit bluer this time. This is where, if you want to make this color look more like the color in the reference, try to, whatever green it is that you're bringing in, which for me is undersea green, mix it with your blue, undersea blue, I was going to say. Ultramarine blue plus undersea green. Repeat the blue that you were using for your skin color, okay? Make it a blue-green that you feel is going to be similar to that in the photo, okay? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but create a blue-green by mixing those two colors together. I think that's okay. It does look similar to the girl's color, maybe a little bit more green. Yeah, I like that. With that yellow, bright yellow in the middle, if I add that around that color, it'll look similar to that in the photo. So I'm gonna go with that. Undersea green is more of a natural mossy desaturated green. So if you're using more of a sap green or something like that, you'll likely end up with a brighter color in your eyes. Okay, so I'm gonna go in with this color and I'm just going to paint in a shape. I would recommend using a smaller brush for this. Start creating your ring around the iris. Don't cover up too much of the previous layer so that you can have that glowing effect. And instead of just drawing a line, back to the line situation, I am kind of bringing a tiny bit of that bluish green color into the iris so that I can create thinner sections in that ring and thicker sections, and you can even like do teeny tiny little marks in the iris so that you can have that, you know, the little, you know how we have specks, like a little color changes in the iris. The you can start creating that effect by just kind of pulling a little bit of that paint into little sections with just the tip of your brush with this kind of bluish green color that you've created. I will be adding a third layer where I'm just focusing on pushing the outer ring. But right now I kind of want to go in stages and I don't want to go too dark too fast. And I also want to make sure that I'm not creating a very like stark looking outline look around the iris. So just ever so slightly, ever so lightly, kind of touching the tip of your brush as you go in, while simultaneously darkening the outer ring, can help you create that kind of the specks, the little color changes within the iris. Okay, and I'm making sure that I'm not going over the highlights. Still trying to keep those highlights protected. All right, that's it. That's all I'm gonna do. I'm gonna leave that alone before I get rid of my, actually here at the bottom I need a little bit more darkness. There it is. And I want to come back to see everything as a whole to make sure that my irises are still circles, still the same size. And if you need to ever so slightly change, improve the circle, improve the edge, anything like that, I would recommend doing that while the paint is still a little bit wet. Okay, I'm gonna leave that alone. Let's add some shadows in the sclera, okay? For this, I'm gonna just keep it really simple and I'm gonna go in with Payne's Gray, which as I said is a cooler blue bias gray. You can make it warmer if you want. The most important thing here is to not keep the sclera completely white. So I'm gonna go in, this is my size 4 round brush, you can use something smaller. And as I said, just keep it simple and remember the three-dimensionality of what you're shading, okay? This is a spherical structure that is being covered up by eyelids and is receding into the deep socket in the skull. So where would you have shadows in that situation? Where would there be shadows? There would be a shadow right here under the upper eyelid. Gonna rinse out this brush, remove that excess water. I swear, absorbent towels are like the unsung hero in watercolor painting. I use them so much. By this point, my absorbent towel is completely drenched. I should probably switch to a dry one. And then you can see how light the gray is, and that is because I'm going in with a tea consistency, okay? And I don't want to cover up the entire sclera with gray because then it'll end up looking like it's gray, okay? But leave little white sections, but do make sure that you're creating shadows. And this is just the first layer. If later on you want to darken certain sections, you can go in over these light gray shapes with the gray that is a little bit darker. As well, like aside from these shadow shapes under the upper eyelid, another thing is, since we have a spherical structure, it's helpful to add in shadows along the inner and outer edges, close to the tear duct and over here in the outer corner of the eye. I'm gonna go in and just ever so slightly curve out. I think I can't do this right now, I think, because this gray is still wet. I'm gonna leave that alone. Okay, cool. So that is my first layer of shadows in the sclera. I'm gonna leave that alone. I don't want to cover up the entire sclera with gray, so I'm gonna leave that at that. Let's continue with our shadow shapes in the skin. So going back to my skin colors, and let's push those darks. So I'm gonna go in with an even darker color mixture, maybe a little bit more ultramarine blue in my mix this time. Test it out. This is a little bit too yellow, I think. More red. And then some blue. Balance it out a little bit. I think we have a good shadow color there. Blooming flowers, that's beautiful. Have the Payne's gray. What is an alternative? Taylor, you could use neutral tints. You could use neutral black. You could use Jane's gray from Daniel Smith. Any gray is fine. I usually don't, whenever I'm working on fuller pieces, I try not to use ivory black and Mars black and things like that, especially not on their own, because they tend to be very like stark looking, especially with watercolor. It's helpful to mix in another color when you're using very neutral blacks like that. But whatever gray you have is fine. All right, so size 8 round brush. I've created a darker color mixture, and I'm going to go in to continue working on shadow shapes. Let's see, I'm going to pull up my larger photo. Okay, so for example, here, I see I need to darken this area. What kind of shape do I have here? Shadow shape, kind of like that. Softening edges with a clean and slightly damp brush. And here, I can darken. So by the way, this would be layer number 3. I have a bit of a shadow shape here. And where else do I need a shadow? Here. And here, created by the nose. And you can use a lighter color if you want to work on midtones that are not super dark. So for example, if you want to create a midtone that is not as dark as this, which I just painted in, you can add more of your red and of your yellow into the mixture, or use it in a thinner consistency, more watered down. For example, I need some lighter shadow shapes right around this section above the crease. And up somewhere around here. And here in the nose, there is a light shape. Here, can bring a little bit of this lighter color into this section of the eyebrow, which is sparser. And do I have some shadow shapes here that I need to work on under the eyebrow? Continue asking yourself, is this section here lighter or darker than this other section over here? Okay. Have any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to share? I want to start overworking this. And also, judging by how things are looking right now, I think I will be going in with a more yellowish kind of glaze skin color at the end. There's always that option where you can slightly change the color temperature. With a very light glaze at the end. All right. I think I'm going to continue observing. Let me see. Okay. I think I'm missing a shadow shape around here. And I think I'm good for now. If I continue working in sections, I might end up overworking this. So I'm going to leave it alone. You know what? Let me just add a little bit of a darker value in the ear. There's a cat hair there. Just a little bit of a darker value in the ear to describe a little bit of the ear, and it's not, so that I can avoid having a completely flat ear at the end. Just having some darker values there. Great. Okay, let's add in the pupils, and then we can go back to the brows and finally paint in the texture in the eyebrows, okay? Right now, since I did some work around the brows, if I go in and paint the texture, the brush strokes that I create are probably going to like dissipate. And so it's best if I allow the brows to dry, and then, we can work on the pupils in the meantime. So back to my Payne's Gray, and we will be using our smallest brush. This is my size 0. And take a look at your pupils, okay? You might be able to see them still, your little circles that you created in pencil, or maybe you cannot even see them anymore. You need to understand the shape that you're painting in, because the pupil is a very defined, what's the word, clean, specific shape that you're painting in. Okay. And so you want to make sure that you understand the circle that you're going to be painting inside of, and that the both pupils in your eyes, they look the same size. Both of your pupils look the same. Okay. And they look like they're looking toward the same direction. Okay. So if you need to sketch them in before painting. And once you're ready, prepare a little bit more of your gray. And I know that pupils look black, but I still like going in with a little bit more of a watered down consistency, maybe a coffee consistency before. And then I can go in with a second layer and really darken the pupils if I want to or I need to. So size 0 brush, taking just a little bit of this gray. And remember to just work around the highlights, okay? Holding my breath. A little bit more. Okay. I did, by the way, this was an artistic choice. I made my pupils a little bit larger than those in the photo, but I kind of thought of doing that since my first version that I created yesterday. This goes hand in hand with how I also changed the highlight shapes a little bit. There's just there's I just wanted to simplify that. Okay, so I changed the highlight shape. I kept their location, or at least partially what I see in the photo, but I didn't really try to recreate them exactly. Same as with the pupils. The little girl, I get the sense that she's looking toward a window or something where there's a lot of light coming in through the window, so you see a lot of reflections in her eyes. And the highlights are quite large, which cover up a good amount of the pupil, which is already small because there's a lot of light coming in through the window. And so the pupil shape kind of gets lost a little bit in the photo. There's probably also like a person standing in front of her taking the photo, which also gets confused with the pupil shape. And so those are the reasons why I just wanted to simplify things. Okay. So the pupils do maybe look a little bit larger. Okay, cool. Shannon, let's see. I used a blue, black, white mix to make blue leaning gray with lots of water. Okay, cool. Cool, cool. Mm. All right, so I think I'm ready to work on the hair texture in the brows. For this, I'm going to be using my size 4 round brush, and I'm going to go back to the skin color mixture, which I was using before, which is on the darker side. So I am going to just make more of that. Plenty of ultramarine blue, Quin Rose, and New Gamboge. This is very yellow. I'm gonna go with more ultramarine blue. And I wanna, this is a hair color, so I wanna go rich and chocolatey with the hair color. And that's a little bit too purple, so I need more New Gamboge. I think that's That's nice. Okay. So size for round brush, and at this point, we have already developed somewhat of a range of values in the brows, and the edges already have some irregularity throughout them. Edges are very important when we're drawing or painting textures because if you have fur, even if it's like a wood texture or anything like that, edges are not going to be smooth. So we're already stemming from a foundation where we have a somewhat of a range of values and somewhat of a hint of textures simply by how the edges are painted with that irregularity. So, really, all we want to do at this point is we're not even filling out the eyebrow shape with little strokes completely. Okay, I like doing this in a subtle way and just kind of reach a happy point in between painting a shape like here this I would consider painting a shape, right? Where is the thicker, hold on, I'm observing the reference photo and trying to see where the thicker brow starts in this little girl. Okay, so that is painting a shape. Okay, I haven't done much. Maybe I gently kind of did this with my brush so that there is some irregularity there, but essentially you're painting an abstract shape, and then while the paint is still wet, you're moving that paint and you're starting to create more of a hair texture while you move that paint. So you're not painting in individual hairs, but more so you're painting a shape, and then you're just like creating brushstrokes over using that same paint that you've applied, if that makes sense. And with just a small amount of this paint in your brush, you can even start adding in the sparse kind of eyebrow hairs outside of the eyebrow, whether it's above or below, because this is a little girl, and oftentimes when painting children or even males, where you don't want the eyebrow to look very, defined or plucked or whatever it is, adding in sparse hairs and some imperfection outside of the eyebrow shape can make things look more natural. Just little teeny tiny hairs in this inner part of the brow. Maybe I'm going to do some quick lifting. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing for the opposite eyebrow. Let's see, where does this start? I'm gonna start with a shape, what's the word? Kind of wiggling my brush like so, and then pulling some of this paint from there. I'm observing also not only the hair length, but also the direction of that hair growth because it changes throughout the brow. The direction changes of that hair growth. Over here, it kind of goes up, but then it kind of flattens out in her, kind of grows down. And then over here, it's more of an angle. So as you can see, in order to communicate hair texture, you don't have to fill in areas with like little lines and marks necessarily. You can subtly convey hair texture by just using, imperfect strokes, thinking of that hair length and the direction of that hair growth. gonna add in just a few little, maybe I switch to my even smaller brush for these very, very thin hairs in the inner part, close to the tear ducts. And if you want to add in more sparse hairs here and there, you can also use your smaller brush. Great. All right. So observing, comparing my painting with the reference photo, there's still some work that I need to do in the eyeballs. I want to darken the ring around the iris. I want to darken the pupil. And I want to do that before painting the lashes for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's see. Prepare more of my Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray. There we go. And this time I'm going to go dark in the pupils. So real thick, more of a milk consistency or even cream consistency. I have a video on my channel where I explain about the different paint consistencies that we work with when working with watercolor. So you can check that out if you would like. Okay. So size 0 round brush going in nice and thick with my Payne's Gray and just painting over the pupil shape that I had painted in before with my more watered down version of my gray. Now it looks very, very black, as you can see. And all I did was change the consistency. Completely changes the value of your color by changing the consistency, whether you're going in more watered down or thicker, changes your value. Just going a little bit of lifting there. Okay. All right, so now I'm gonna darken the outer ring around the iris, and I'm gonna go back to my blue-green mixture. Blue-green mixture. So I'm using undersea green with ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue, undersea green. You can make it bluer, you can make it greener, whatever you'd like is fine, but now we're going in thicker. So think more of a milk consistency. And because we have previously had previously gone in with our medium color, if you will, medium blue-green color, where we pulled in a little bit of that paint into the iris, by going in with more of a thicker consistency with this blue-green, the contrast shouldn't be as stark looking, okay? Because you have that mid-tone there. But if you start painting in a ring around the iris and you like everything is still very light within the iris, then you're going to have a lot of contrast. And that might end up looking a little bit too, I don't know, artificial, and you'll have to go in and work on the midtones. Gonna paint in the shadow right here, even though we can't see the upper part of the iris because it's covered by the eyelid. We need a shadow in the iris as well, just like we created in the sclera, right? So I went in with this color and painted the shadow shape right under the eyelid. Gonna do the same thing for the opposite eye. Let me know if you have any questions that you would like me to answer, whether it's on this or anything else, art life related that you would like my input on. You can bring in a little bit of this darker color into the iris if you want, for those little specks of color. And you can also do a little bit of scrubbing and lifting if you want to soften that effect as well, okay? You can always do a little bit of scrubbing and lifting. Just don't go overboard, because too much scrubbing can also lead to overworked results. But you can see how I've worked around the highlights this whole time. They're still there. I have two little highlights in the upper parts of the iris, coming into the pupil a little bit in both eyes. All right. I have a couple things that I want to do still. This is my size 0 round brush, and this is a pretty dark kind of brown color that I created. It's also a lot thicker than what I've been using so far. So with this color, I'm simply going to go in and push some darkest shadow shapes in creases, gonna jump around really the entire thing and just create my very darkest shadow shapes wherever I want to, wherever I feel I need to add them in. Let's see here. Here, there's a crease. And as a rule of thumb, at least for me, when I get to this stage at which I'm really pushing those darkest darks, really my shapes are teeny tiny when I'm going this dark. Like the darker I get and the thicker my consistency gets, the smaller my shapes are. The lighter the shapes, the larger the washes. And then the more I get closer to my darkest shapes, the smaller they tend to be. A cat hair on the bristles of my brush and also on my painting. Oh my goodness. There it is. Also, if you want to do some final hair textures in the brows, they should be dry by now. So with your thinnest brush, if you want to go in and create some final textures in the brows, just make sure that you're paying attention to the photo and that you're noticing the direction of that hair growth. And just less is more at this point. You've already created a sense of texture in the brows. You really don't need to do much, okay? This is just if you want to develop some final textures. You can do that with your smallest brush and this very thick paint. I think that's enough. If you feel you need just a little bit more of a dark gray shadow in the sclera as well, I would say do that now before you paint the lashes. Okay, so if you want to go in thicker with your gray, whatever gray it is that you're using, maybe go in with your size 0 now and push those darkest areas. Just essentially a smaller shadow shape right on the lighter gray shape that you've already created. Let me know if you have any last questions because we're going to be adding the lashes. Then I'll show you my little final wash or glaze, I should say, that I sometimes bring in to change the temperature of the skin a little bit, and we'll be done. This year, I want to work on more portraits. I have that as a personal project. Um, so if you've been following me for a while, you probably know that I do a lot of still life, I do animals, I do landscapes. I tend to kind of jump between my different types of subjects because I get bored. So my tutorials are pretty much, they cover the entire range of subject matter. um, and I have painted portraits before, but I want to do more because, as I said in the beginning of this class, portraits and figures are among the most challenging subject matters, if not the most challenging of subjects that an artist may decide to draw or paint. And because of this, if you stop working on your figures or your portraits, even just a few months, you kind of feel like you need to go back and relearn a lot of things, or like, you feel very rusty if you stop practicing. The more, it's what I noticed, the more challenging you get with your subjects, the easier it is for you to kind of forget important things unless you have done it for a very, very long time. And so I want to do more. I want to do more portraits and really challenge myself this year. Okay, great. So I think I'm done with my values. Do I need any no, I think I'm good with my values. So I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to paint my lashes now, okay? And I'll show you about the last glaze in just a bit. So for the lashes, you can either go in with a very dark brown, or you can go in with your gray, or you can add some brown into your gray if you want, though because we're creating our brown with our three primaries, it can just be too many colors mixed together. So I'm just going to stick with my gray, but I will say that again, if you're going in with plain gray or black, it's important that you go in with more of a watered down consistency first, not a tea consistency, but more of a coffee consistency, instead of going right in and painting very, very like black looking lashes. Because especially when you're painting a child or a more masculine face, you don't want to go in and paint very like unnatural lashes, right? Because it's going to seem like they are wearing fake eyelashes or like they have mascara on or something like that. And so we want to keep some amount of subtlety, like a softness to the lashes. And by going in with more of a coffee consistency first, it's going to make things look more natural at the end. And if you've never painted little kind of short tapered strokes with a slight curve to them, it's very much worth practicing before painting your lashes, okay? Because I cannot tell you again with the I cannot tell you. I have ruined portraits by adding in lashes, okay? I have to tell you this. And it's not easy, especially if you haven't painted portraits before, or you haven't painted portraits in a while. You forget these things. You forget how to do them if you're not practicing them consistently. And so practice doing little like curved tapered brush strokes in different directions as well, because remember that lashes change direction, right? What I was remember what I was telling you when, with the pencil sketch in the beginning. They curve toward one direction over here, then they change, they become more kind of, we see them as being more straight up right around here in the center of the eye, and then the curve kind of turns in the opposite direction. Okay, so if you're, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, you will struggle depending on what eyelash, like where you're at, if that makes sense. So by practicing your little strokes in different directions, it's really going to help you go in with greater confidence. Okay, do them in the opposite direction. Also remember how eyelashes are longer along the outer edges and then shorter in the inner edges. Okay, cluster them together in different ways. You know, there's a sparseness. If you want your eyelashes to look more natural, bring in, like, you don't want a dull effect in the eyelashes, right? Eyelashes are imperfect. They are sometimes overlapping over each other in different ways, clustering together in different ways. Uh, you know, in the inner corner, they're a little bit more sparse than in the outer corner. And then we have the lower lashes, which I like to think of as being like a third in length when compared to the upper lashes, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a lot to remember at once, okay? But I'm just going to start with this one. I think it's the easiest eye for me. And remember where they're growing out of. The eyelashes are growing out of the, and you can like observe your eyes in a mirror. It's one of the best things that you can do, and observe people around you in real life. Notice where the eyelashes start. They are starting right above your upper eyelid. And in the case of the lower lashes, they start right under your lower waterline. Okay? They don't start on the waterline, they start below the waterline. Okay? Starting with the lower lashes here. If you're ever in doubt, look at yourself in the mirror. Okay? Okay. Start with the upper ones here. Whoop. There we go. Okay. And don't want to make them super long. They start changing direction here, and then they curve in. For those of you who grabbed the reference photo from the Patreon post, observe those lashes carefully. And remember that with watercolor, oftentimes less is more. And then and if you accidentally create a very long lash or a very dark lash, allow it to dry. Allow it to dry completely, okay? And then you can go in and do some very gentle scrubbing and lifting after everything has dried. Use just the tip of your brush. Uh-huh. Okay, so there's one eye. All right, gonna do the opposite eye now, which for me is gonna be a little bit harder because I'm right-handed. Okay, taking a little bit of paint, just a little bit. Coffee consistency. And using just the tip of my brush, starting with the lower lashes. Cluster them together in different ways. Make sure that you're not creating patterns because that's also going to lead to unnatural results. And looking at the photo, oh, I don't even know how to position my arm here. This is when a very, very fine detailing brush is helpful. Maybe even like a script or liner brush. If you find that you're struggling with those very thin tapered lines, it might be worth looking into a very thin brush. A liner brush is essentially like a round brush, but the bristles are longer, and they are helpful for very thin, longer lines. All right, so we're almost done. I'm gonna show you this last glaze that I'm gonna be doing is totally optional. If you don't feel you need it, don't do it, okay? The more layering you do with watercolor, the more of a chance there is that you'll arrive at overworked results. This is just if you want to make your skin look a little bit more, oh, that's very, very dark there. If you want your skin to look a little bit more like with a yellow undertone, which my first layer did look more yellow, but as I continued building up my shadow shapes, I feel like I lost a little bit of that yellow undertone. So I just want to ever so slightly change the temperature of her skin. For some reason, also through the webcam, you can barely see my lighter shadow shapes in the sclera. Can make them a little bit darker. The webcam struggles with lighter colors and yellows. So yellows specifically. All right. So final thing here. Oh, by the way, if you want to paint a background here, like maybe a darker background, feel free to do that as well. Maybe you can do Like just go ahead and use some Payne's gray, paint some gray in. Keep it simple. Have a little line that I'm going to soften here in the crease. Okay. Great. So finally for that glaze, for the glaze, I'm going to create a skin tone that is a little bit more yellow, okay? So here, Shannon, it's so good to hear that. Thank you so much. I'm glad it was helpful. Valerie, good night. Good night, Valerie. Thank you so much for popping in. Let us know how it goes, okay? Okay. So yellow, pink, little bit of blue. Not so much, okay? This is a glaze. This is a final glaze that I do not want this final glaze to affect the value work that I've already done. And so I want to make sure that I'm going in nice and light and watered down, okay? This is definitely a good, you can see hopefully how warm it is because it has plenty of yellow in it, okay? I think this is a good color for this last glaze. The difference between a glaze and simple layering is that a glaze is watered down so that you can still see the colors and the value shapes that you've created underneath. As opposed to layering, you could go in with any consistency. Okay, so glazing is a type of layering, but not all layering is glazing. Okay. All right, so I'm going in with tea consistency, kind of yellowish skin tone that I've created. This is my size 14 round brush. And all I'm gonna do is just gently go in and paint some of this in the face, not even all over it. Like I'm not trying to cover everything up. Work around those lightest areas if you don't want to darken them. Oop, getting a little bit of bleeding here. That's okay. Softening some edges. Okay, so hopefully you can see how this final glaze brought everything together a little bit more and enhanced at least a little bit that kind of yellow undertone. If you guys have any last questions, let me know. Just gonna finish up my painting here. I really shouldn't be doing much else, but while I wait on some final questions, I'm gonna use this dampness that I just created with the final glaze. Okay, let's see. Is there a reason why you didn't? Gail, hi. How's it going? Taylor first. Okay. My pupils yellow got into my eyelid. Is it too late now? It's too late now, but how would you correct? Just soaking up some color. Pupils yellow. Do you mean the iris yellow? The yellow from the iris? Is that what you mean? So it depends, Taylor. If the paint is already dry, allow for it to dry completely before trying to go in and do some scrubbing. If it's still wet, then absolutely take your absorbent towel and just do some blotting. Hey guys. Let's see, let me remove this. Oh, I have a lot of light behind me. Let me answer my final questions here. So I hope that helped, Taylor. As long as the paint is still wet, I would go in and just very quickly with my absorbent towel, dab a little bit of that color up, okay? And if it's already starting to dry, like if you're in that weird, damp, semi-dry state, I would allow it to dry completely before going in and doing some gentle scrubbing. Gail, is there a reason why you didn't add the brown by the pupil? um, okay, so let's see. So for me, Gail, it's not so much a brown as it is like a yellow ochreish color, like almost uh it's like I don't know, like I see it more as a yellow, and because I know that by adding in a yellow kind of underpainting in eyes whenever I can, when the eye color lends itself to go in with a very light yellow underpainting, I do that because I know that that's going to help me create more luminosity in the iris. And so in this specific case, instead of going in with brown or a yellow ochre, which brown and yellow ochre are neutralized, all browns are very neutralized, desaturated colors, which could like make it so that I don't arrive at that luminosity in the iris. Instead, I went in with that yellow and light green underpainting to slowly transition that into the blue green. Okay. So this is an artistic choice that I made in order to create more luminous effects, because going in with a brown is likely going to lead to more kind of muted color in the eye, and I wanted a brighter color in the eye. I hope that that makes sense. But it's one of those things where you need to make the choice before. So here's the thing, Gail. Like, oftentimes as artists, it's not just about taking a reference photo and trying to copy everything exactly as is. It's important that you use the colors and use the techniques that you feel are going to help you arrive at the results that you enjoy, even if it means that the color of this person's eyes is not going to be exactly the same. In this particular case, I'm not really trying to achieve 100% likeness with the person in the photo. It's not a portrait that someone is commissioning me to do. And so I'm bringing in my artistic voice, maybe even more. Okay. But I hope that that makes sense. Sometimes it is just like with everything else, whether you're painting an animal, a landscape, a still life arrangement, it's not just taking a reference photo and copying it exactly. It's making artistic choices that you know are going to help you arrive at the results that you enjoy. And for me, it's always something that I kind of think about before jumping in. As I said yesterday, I created my first kind of version of this. And I decided yesterday that this would be a better choice for my own tastes. I hope that that makes sense. Okay. You're welcome, Taylor. I learned a lot of live painting and your pacing. Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks so much. I really, really appreciate that, Taylor. For me, explaining the why behind what I'm doing is very important because I think that following things step by step, but when you don't, what the person trying to provide instructions doesn't provide the why behind the choices, they are not giving you the tools and the understanding that you need in order to do it on your own, right? To succeed on your own. I want to give you the information so that you can then take it onto your future paintings and make your own artistic choices based on being informed. I Does that make sense? My brain is getting a little bit tired. Mm, Happy to hear that, Gail. Happy to hear it made sense. For example, Gail, um, if I were to paint someone with brown eyes, even if it's a very dark brown eye, I am likely going to go in with a yellow underpainting first in the iris instead of going in with a brown right away because I know that by going in with the yellow first, which yellow is a nice color to kind of lighten browns with, it goes well with brown. I'm gonna go in with yellow first. If the person has green eyes, I'm gonna go in with yellow first. Okay, and this is something that I learned painting animals. Is that yellow underpainting? Whenever the color lends itself, it's really, really helpful with glowing, creating that glowing result. Oftentimes with watercolor, like yes, this is super helpful with eyes, but in general, try to think of what color you can go in with first that is going to enhance that glow, that luminosity. For example, if you're painting a green pear, and when you see that pear in real life, it looks green, okay? Instead of going in with that local green color, go in with a very light green you created with yellow first, and then develop the mid-tone local color, and then develop the darkest darks. Go in with that base color that is going to help you create luminosity and vibrancy. This is so huge when working with watercolor. I see a lot of people go in way too dark, way too fast. And then what happens is that you're lacking that luminosity, that vibrancy that is so particular to watercolor. Michelle, I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you so much for joining in today. So, I'm going to leave you guys because I have something to do in just a little bit. Um, Thank you so much to my dear Patreon members who chose the topic for today's lesson. Thank you so much to all Patreon members for being a part of my innermost community, this little school that I am building on Patreon. It really truly means the world to me. And if it weren't for you guys, I simply would not be able to teach these live classes and make them public for everyone to enjoy. I'm about to film a portrait tutorial for my Patreon members in the $6 tier and $15 tiers in the upcoming few days. I'm going to be working on that. And you can look forward to seeing that step by step, fully narrated, real time painting tutorial. Probably next week, late next week, I'm going to be sharing that real time tutorial with you guys. I have chosen the photo. It's a beautiful photo. And yeah. So thank you guys. Oh, and remember, if you're watching on YouTube, remember that I teach these live classes and I make them public. Like I teach these once a month. On the third Saturday of every month at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, I teach, like next month is going to be a sketching class. And then the following month after that, it's going to be another watercolor class, and then a sketching class, and then a watercolor class, and so on. Because as you know, if you've been following me for some amount of time, for me, sketching is very, very important as well. If you're trying to develop your painting skills, you're going to benefit from learning how to draw and not being so dependent always on tracing and grids and that kind of stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's really, really so fulfilling to be able to create art wherever you are, to be able to go to a little park, a coffee shop somewhere with your sketchbook and a few limited supplies, and to be able to draw what's in front of you and then paint it in. That is so fulfilling, and I want you guys to experience that. And what I have found is that a lot of people think that they don't have it in them to learn to draw, that they're just not drawers. But the thing is that most of the time, at least 80-85% of the time, it's just that no one has taught them how to draw, or they simply haven't practiced the right way. And so I do have a drawing mini course for the total beginner, which is completely free. And all of the lessons are available on YouTube, but I have also created this beautiful page on my website. It's privated, but if you have the link to the mini course, you're going to see all of the class videos there in the order that I have designed them to be worked through in. And right below the class videos, you see the downloadables, the reference photos, and all of this. And I also have all other recommended resources below the class videos. So after you make your way through the mini course videos, once you're ready for those like more advanced classes on shading, on a bunch of different topics like that, you also have those links below the lessons of the course. So if you're on Patreon, that is one of the first kind of links, resources that I send you when you first come in. So make sure to check out that welcome message that I send every single person joining my Patreon. Manually, I send them to you. And if you're not on Patreon, feel free to reach out via email, and I'll send you the link to that mini course so that you can enjoy it. If you're just getting started with drawing, I really want to make sure that you're not skipping any of the foundational stuff. I teach everything from essential drawing supplies to how to hold your pencil for drawing, to why it is important to draw on a tilted surface, or at least practice your drawing on a tilted surface, how to visualize objects and subject matter as simple shapes, and then how to visualize them as three-dimensional forms. And then I teach you my quicker shading method with different drawing pencil grades. All of that is in the course. So if you're not on Patreon and you'd like access to that external page, simply send me an email and I'll get it to you as quickly as I can. Reach out via, you can send me an email. You can find me at hello@ericalancaster.com. hello@ericalancaster.com. Okay, my Erica is with a K and Lancaster is with a C. And my name is not with a CK or with a C. It's with a K. Okay. So I'll get you that mini course if you send me an email. Okay. Aside from that, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dare. I'm glad that this was helpful, Dare. Thank you so much. Yeah, for sure, Gail. I'm glad that tip was helpful. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Shannon. Juriki, everyone who joined in. Chantal, thank you so much for popping in today. You are amazing. And keep working on your art. And yeah, have fun when you're doing it. That's so important, okay? Thank you guys so much. Hope to see you around. Feel free to reach out, whether it's through email or through social media. You can find me at Instagram and Facebook as well. Instagram, it's Erica_Lancaster_art. I love connecting with people through Instagram as well. Patreon members, it's important that you reach out via Patreon or via email, because social media, I do kind of, it's not so much a priority. I don't get back to you nearly as fast, and I do tend to sometimes kind of lose track of social media because it's just it's so much to stay on top of as a single person doing everything. So if you're a Patreon member, you are my priority. So make sure that you reach out via email or via Patreon private DM. Okay. And if you are someone who is just meeting me now on YouTube or you would like to connect with me the first time kind of thing, I would recommend reaching out via Instagram or via email as well. I'd be super happy to help out with whatever you might need, any questions, and so on. Okay. What is the email? It's Erica with a K. Sorry, scratch that. Hello at Erica with a K, Lancaster.com. Hello at ericalancaster.com. Okay. And if you ever lose that, you can find me at ericalancaster.com. Okay. That's my website. So, and through my website, you can contact me. Okay. With no issues. Does that make sense, you guys? Thank you guys so much for joining. I look forward to our next live session or connecting with you via the various forms. um, and have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy your practice, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye, everyone. Take care.